how to get young adults to care about politics.
I plan on registering to vote. I just haven't, have an opportunity to go and register.
That isn't stopping the parties from trying to get their vote.
We promote Democratic candidates to students on campus. We offer internships with Democratic candidates with the state party to our students.
So our goal on campus is to try and engage students and get them involved in the political process. So that can be by bringing in interesting speakers who are talking about policy.
Also, we look at the rising tide of dark money in Arizona this election season with a study out just days ago. This is Arizona Week. Welcome to Arizona Week. I'm Christopher Conover in for Lorraine Rivera. Young adults tend to turn out in low numbers on Election Day. To combat that, politicians are turning to the places young people go in hopes of getting them to the polls in November. More than 100,000 students are enrolled in college around the state. The vast majority are eligible to vote. And once again, the big question is, will they turn out at the polls?
I just don't think I have the time to vote.
I do plan on voting.
It's just never really been that much of an importance to me.
My vote matters.
To reach this tech-savvy generation, voting advocates and parties are reaching out on platforms and with faces familiar to the younger voter. For nearly 30 years, MTV has encouraged viewers to cast a ballot with the Rock the Vote campaign. This year, the music channel teamed up with radio conglomerate iHeartRadio.
It doesn't matter what side you're on, voting is the party.
Voting is the party.
And you can't get into the party without being on the list.
The political parties are also out with videos. In the last week, Democrats launched one featuring the stars of the popular Avengers movie series who made fans a promise.
And if you do vote and help protect this country from fear and ignorance,
Mark will do a nude scene in his next movie?
Mark Ruffalo.
Mark Ruffalo?
Mark Ruffalo will do a nude scene in his next movie.
Wait, what?
Mark, joking aside, the parties are also bringing their messages to university campuses through clubs such as the College Republicans.
Our goal on campus is to try and engage students and get them involved in the political process. So that can be by bringing in interesting speakers who are talking about policy, or it can be getting them plugged in with different candidates running for office.
The University of Arizona Young Democrats are working hard too.
We promote Democratic candidates to students on campus. We offer internships with Democratic candidates with the state party to our students and really try to get them involved with the political process.
The Bernie Sanders campaign was popular among students, and that leaves Democrats with the question of whether those same young voters go to the polls in November.
We're trying to get them involved in, everything down to school board and corporation commission, races that really Senator Sanders' platforms, that's the level that they're going to be implemented at.
In it all, there's advice for politicians and political campaigns on connecting with young voters.
If they do want to reach out to the younger audience, they have to put in some resources. So it doesn't have to be, coming to campus and shaking every hand, but it does involve, reaching out, doing social media, things like that, different ways to engage with that audience so that they know you exist, that they know that what you're running for, what you stand for.
Students and experts say one of the best way to reach young voters is through social media. Sudha Ram is a researcher at the University of Arizona specializing in social media. We sat down with her earlier. We hear about politicians and students alike talking about social media in the context of campaigns. How big a penetration does social media really have these days?
Actually, social media is a very, very important part of our world today. Roughly in the world, about 75 to 80% of adults who are online are actually on social media. And social media is a very broad term that actually encompasses a whole range of platforms. Of course, most people hear about Facebook, and some of the people have heard about Twitter, which is somewhat of a lesser known platform, still very well known. But there's a whole range of other platforms like Instagram, there's Pinterest, there's Reddit, there's Snapchat, which is used a lot by young people. And so I'd say social media has a huge penetration globally as well as in the United States.
Before we get too far into some of those, is it an effective way to communicate a message, for example, a politician, or do people see in their social media feeds, they see something and they just move on? Or are people really reading their social media?
So that's the other interesting part of social media is, of course, there are, if you consider Facebook, for example, there are people who like a page, and then when you like a page, then it shows up on your news feed when, a politician, for example, posts something on their page. And you can actually measure out of the people on whose newsfeed it shows up, how many people are engaging with it. And so people tend to actually get most of their news these days through social media instead of directly from the news website or from the newspapers or other forms of media. Increasingly, there's almost a 50% rise in the amount of news that's being heard through social media sites.
We even have social media here at Arizona Public Media, Facebook, Twitter,
Yes.
and all those things as
and you have a very nice page as well, yes.
Thank you. How persuasive is social media? So we know people are reading it, we know 75% of people are working with it, but how persuasive is it? Or is it just an echo chamber reinforcing opinions that are already there?
So social media, depending on the age group, and the demographics of the people you're considering can do different things for different people. So to me, there are two kinds of people in the world: those who are open-minded and who actually read about the issues and then make up their mind. And there are people who already made up their mind on certain topics, and it's very hard to change their mind. But if you think about politics today, there's a lot more people who want to know about the issues. There are a lot more independents, there are a lot more undecided voters, and it's these people that actually social media makes a big difference. So I feel that when politicians or other people post their message, they can talk about issues, and it's certainly going to help persuade people on social media.
At the beginning of this, you mentioned Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, Reddit, Pinterest, and there are a whole host of others. Is there one that's more persuasive than others, or are they all fairly equal?
Depending on the demographic of the people you're considering, so things like Instagram and Snapchat, it's the millennials, the younger people who are on there. And there's a lot of video on Snapchat that the younger people look at. But Facebook, the largest growing demographic on it is the people who are 50 plus. And so, for example, our grandmas or older people, our parents, are all starting to join Facebook, and there's a huge target market there for the older people. Of course, the millennials have already been on Facebook and Twitter for a long time.
I was going to say, even my mom is on Facebook now.
There you go.
We can't get away from it. It seems when it comes to these demographics, they are definitely targeted. So a politician, for example, do they have to change their message, or can they just put it on each platform, if you will, each social media platform, or do they have to change that message to hit the demographic?
So that's the cool thing about social media is you can have a variety of messages on every platform. You can look at the demographics of the platform, of course, like Snapchat is mostly for the younger people. But on Facebook, you're actually covering the entire demographic, the rich, the poor, the old, the young, the various kinds of ethnic groups, et cetera, and the various geographic groups. So you can actually measure the impact of whatever message you're putting across on Facebook, and you can tailor to each of the audiences on Facebook, and you don't have the same message on all the different platforms.
You've mentioned a couple times you can measure with a lot of social media, Facebook, what's going on. How do you measure that? To most people, I think Facebook, you post something, a picture, or you read something. How is this all information measured?
So let's take Facebook or Twitter, for example. Let's say a politician or some sort of person sets up, or a company sets up their page on Facebook or their account on Twitter, and they start posting things. Well, on Facebook, you can actually see who's reacting to your messages. And now on Facebook, it's not just a like button, it's a like, a love, an angry, and happy, those kinds of buttons. So you can actually measure the degree to which people like your post or dislike it. and you can actually look at their comments and analyze them. There's a lot of natural language processing techniques, a technology like machine learning now available. You can actually gather the sentiment out of each of their pieces of text they're posting to see if it's positive, negative, or neutral, and which posts they're actually reacting to. You also have a timestamp on every reaction, and you can glean the location from which they're actually liking these posts. So you can start to sort of measure the pulse of humanity by tracking all their digital footprints to see how their opinions are changing over time, how the opinions in one county in California is different from the other county in California, and how that differs from Pima County in Arizona. So really, there's a lot of rich information or insights you can extract from the data, and then you can tailor your messages to the audience.
It seems like also with social media, we see politicians get in trouble because they post something to whatever feed they're hitting, and then it's out there and it's so widespread. It seems like there could be a change in the way campaigning is accomplished because of that.
Absolutely. So when you tweet about something or when you post something, you see an instantaneous reaction, and you also see how that reaction is sort of changing over time. So you can decide how you want to change your message, what issues you want to highlight, what things you really want to post and what you don't want to post, because pretty much you can get instant feedback on everything you're doing online.
Much of the focus of political campaigns is on young adults, ages 25 to 34. Yet people born in 1998 are eligible to vote this year. Efforts to register these new voters are in almost every school. Elliot Bustamante didn't graduate from high school that long ago, and now he's trying to convince Native American high school students to register to vote. You are working to register high school seniors to vote. Why is it important? And also, your program's a little different because you're doing it out on the Tohono O'odham Nation.
Yes.
So why are you trying to register kids to vote?
Well, just to get the youth that are of age to register to vote, just to get them out there in the polls and be active in the voting polls, because it's a very good opportunity. I mean, not that long ago we were able to vote, and now we're of age to vote. So now we can go out and voice our opinion or voice our mind through the voting polls. And so I think that's a big step.
You graduated from high school in 2015, so you're a new voter. What made you decide to start to go out and actively register some of your friends maybe, or the kids coming up right behind you?
Being a new voter, it's just a great opportunity. You know, you get to see who you voted for and what impact they're going to make on the communities. And it'd be a good opportunity for them also just to see how the bureaucracy works in the United States.
You're doing this out on the Tohono O'odham Nation. Does that make people want to vote more, being Native Americans, or do you have a harder time getting people to register?
It's a little bit of a harder thing to do on the reservation because we're so isolated and we're not aware of all these problems that are happening across the United States. And with the vote, it'll go far if we're aware of who's running for a higher position in the United States.
The group you're working with, are you registering just high school students, or are you out there on other parts of the reservation trying to register adults who may not be registered?
Yes, that's our initiative. That's what we're trying to do, go out into the communities, the various communities on the Tohono O'odham Nation. There are 11 districts on the nation. And this Saturday, we'll be going out to one of the districts and all the communities in there, registering those people to vote that live in the communities.
What's the reaction you get, first of all, in the schools, when you come up to students and say, hey, you're old enough to vote, do you want to register? What kind of reaction do you get from the students?
Well, last week we did some reports. We just gave them the announcement, if you register to vote, and we have this committee, if you want to register to vote, you can come out. Since you guys are old enough, since they're old enough to go out at the age of 18, you just get that dead silence look, like, what's that? Like they're not aware of what they can do with the age they're at right now.
Once you explain it, are they eager to sign up, or are they like, forget it, and just walk away?
Yeah, they just get discouraged, I guess. They don't really care. They have no care for voting. Yeah, that's the kind of reaction I get.
Are the kids you're working with, do you have a specific number you're trying to get to before the deadline, or just as many as you can?
Just as many as we can. You know, we're working closely with the various departments on the nation, including the Bob River Unified School District. We're having a voting registration day at all the high schools on the nation, and so it'll be good to have all the of-age people that are able to vote this upcoming election registered.
And adults, you said you're doing some things out in some of the districts this weekend. Do you get the same reaction from the adults as you do from the kids? Why should I bother?
Yes, that's what it's always like. Even when the tribal elections are here, they don't really want to vote, I guess, also, but yeah.
Is there a way, once we're done voting come November, are you going to keep working on this to get adults and new voters excited to vote and more involved, so 2 years down the road when the next election comes up, maybe there'll be more people voting, more excited?
Yes, that's my initiative personally, because it's very good to see youth that are wanting and willing to go out into the communities and encourage adults, and even working closely with adults too, how they can go far and to get those registered voters for the upcoming elections yet to come in the later years.
And when you register someone out on the reservation, are they registered to vote then just in the state and U.S. and county elections, or does it also count for tribal elections, or is that a different system?
Yeah, it's a different system. There's the tribal elections, which they had to register through the tribe, and then there's the state, the U.S. government elections. That has to be registered through the State Department.
So are you doing both, or are you just concentrating on the November election right now?
Yeah, we're just concentrating on the November election. Then come for the tribal election, we could possibly do an outreach program like this we're doing right now.
All right, well, good luck on getting as many people registered as you can.
Yeah, thank you. So it was great to be on here today. It's really goes to show on how hard we're trying to get the message out there to the community members, and even also to the non-community members in the various surroundings of the nation also, on what we're trying to do.
Now we turn to another aspect of election season, fundraising. The sources of campaign money are not always transparent. The Arizona Center for Investigative Reporting just released an in-depth look at where this year's campaign funds are coming from. Reporter Evan Weiler spoke with us about the findings. Evan, thanks so much for sitting down with us. I looked at the report you did, and nearly $2 million so far this election cycle has been spent by outside groups in Arizona, and a lot of that, though, is what we call dark money.
That's correct. Yeah, we've seen about $2 million, and yeah, about 30% so far is coming from groups that don't disclose where the money comes from.
We were talking before we went on camera here. You said not only is a lot of that dark money, 30%, but some of it appears to be money that we can trace, but as you got a little further back, that was not the case.
Yeah, so as you and most of your audience probably know, these outside groups are allowed to spend in elections advocating for the election or the defeat of particular candidates. And while some of them are dark money groups, that means that they simply report that they spent the money, but not who gives them the money. Other groups do report where the money is coming from, but once you trace that money back a couple steps, it comes from groups that don't disclose where that money comes from. And if those groups were to have spent directly, they would have also been considered dark money groups.
Dark money is something folks like you and I talk about and enjoy trying to pull the sheet off of, but is it increasing the amount of usage over, let's say, 2 years ago or 4 years ago in Arizona?
Well, 2014 was an out of the norm. there was a sort of explosion of dark money spent in 2014, in particular going to the governor's race, mostly to help Governor Doug Ducey, and to the Corporation Commission to help Commissioners Little and Faris get elected. That year, makes this year look like small potatoes. This year we see a lot less dark money, at least so far. But since 2014, we've been paying very close attention to see what it's going to look like this time around. So we'll have to wait and see how the general election shakes out, but if it follows the trend of the primary, it should be significantly less.
When it comes to dark money, you mentioned the Corporation Commission. We've got another Corporation Commission on the ballot now. Is that where most of the money seems to be going, or is it spread across different races?
So in terms of just overall outside spending, we've seen a lot of money go to help re-elect Bob Burns to the Corporation Commission. And if you look at the groups that are doing the spending, it's that situation we talked about earlier, where you've got groups that disclose their spending, but if you trace it back a few steps, it's all coming from Solar City. So Solar City really wants to help get him elected, and if Solar City were to spend directly on the election rather than to give it through one of these organizations to do the spending, it would be considered dark money because you can't trace it beyond coming from Solar City.
When we talk about dark money versus outside groups, let me just get some definitions for our viewers.
Sure.
Outside groups are just groups that don't necessarily have a tie to Arizona, be they live here or registered as a corporation here, correct?
Well, they can be. Outside groups could be things like the Arizona Realtors PAC. So the Realtors PAC takes in thousands of donations from real estate agents across the state, and then the leadership of that political action committee spends on candidates that it believes are, favorable to the industry or in some way going to help further their goals. Some of these other groups, though, are much more opaque. These groups have sometimes obscure sounding names, and it's really unclear what their goals are exactly.
It seems like a lot of times those groups with obscure sounding names or nice sounding names are some of the darkest groups out there.
Well, that's one way to look at it. You've got a group like the Arizona Free Enterprise Club, which is one of the groups that did a lot of spending in 2014. They're doing some spending again this time around. They're a dark money group. They don't disclose where the money comes from, and their filings with the Corporation Commission, the business filings that they do have to file that say, here's who we are, here's what we stand for, they are pretty generic. They stand for growth and they're pro-business, but that's about as far as they go. A lot of the others, in 2014 there was a group called the 60 Plus Association. They spent a lot in the Corporation Commission race, and they purport to be looking out for the interests of senior citizens, right, 60 plus. And then you've got other groups that are even more generic sounding, like Save Our Future Now was another big one in 2014. So it's hard to tell exactly what it is they stand for and what their goals are.
Do we see in Arizona the same dark money groups over and over again, or do they cycle through during the different election years?
Both, really. We see some of these groups like the Free Enterprise Club, which has been around for, I believe, more than a decade. I think they first incorporated in the early 2000s, and they've been one of these more active groups. You've also got groups that come in, they get set up, and they spend money. There's a group that is pushing to help Democrats in the legislature this year called Arizona Wins. They were incorporated earlier this year. They don't disclose where the money comes from. It's really a small amount compared to some of those other groups, especially from 2014. But again, no disclosure on where that money is coming from.
We heard a lot of talk in the legislature about regulating dark money, but it still exists, so not much regulation going on.
No, in fact, a lot of people who pay attention to this stuff think that after this new set of campaign finance laws that was passed this past legislative session goes into effect, we are essentially codifying in state law that these dark money groups will not receive scrutiny, at least from local elections officials. So not to get too far into the weeds, but what we've done with the most recent campaign finance bill that was passed, SB 1516, is we've said as long as these groups are not in bad standing with the IRS, then their status as a group that can spend without disclosure will not be questioned.
Let's switch over to keeping an eye on these groups, not only in the reports like you're doing, but the folks you work with have a new Twitter handle at AZDarkMoneyBot. Talk a little bit about that. What is this?
Well, like we talked about earlier, the dark money groups, they do have to file expenditure reports. So they have to say, you know, we spent X thousands of dollars on Y candidate in Z race, right? They have to disclose that information. They don't disclose where the money comes from. But as those are being filed with the Secretary of State's office, and right now they're required to be filed within, I believe, 24 hours or a complete business day, we can, and what we designed was a program to go in and scrape the information from the Secretary of State's website on a regular basis and store that information in a database, then construct tweets and send them out through the Twitter bot that we have set up. So almost, you know, as close to real-time reporting of at least the expenditures as they're happening. And you know, our goal with this is to just get that information out, and we've seen some other news organizations take the information and build stories with it, and that's really what we're aiming for. You know, it's great to see when other journalists can just follow a Twitter bot or this Twitter profile and get information that's going to lead them to something meaningful for their community.
And finally, a note about a special live presentation next week from Arizona Public Media and the Community Foundation of Southern Arizona. Community Interactive, Stories from the Border. A panel of journalists who cover the borderlands will discuss their work and the issues of trade, policy, and security. The panel will be moderated by Maria Hinojosa, the executive producer and host of NPR's Latino USA. It's Thursday, September 29th at the Fox Tucson Theater, starting at 6:30. Register for your free tickets and get more information on our website. And that's our program. I'm Christopher Conover. Thanks for watching.